Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So these are the questions that we're going to look at from our homework. And so we'll start with 2.1. And 2.1 is graphing of these lines. And we'll need to read the directions so we know what we need to find. And then see what we have to work with here. Question 7, I believe, is finding the midpoint. All right, so question 7, we want to find the midpoint. So they give you 2 points, and we want to find the midpoint. So they give us our 2 points, which are decimals in this case, 1.8 and a minus 4.4, and 6.7, and 3.3. So what we want to first identify is what we need to do. So what we need to do is we need to find the midpoint. So we're going to write up the formula that goes along with the midpoint. I honestly think that's the best thing to do is every time we come to a question that requires a formula, per se the slope, or in this case the midpoint, write that formula down first. That way you got it, and you can see how all the pieces go into the formula. It just really reinforces the formula to write it down several times. So let's go ahead now and write down our midpoint formula. Sometimes the midpoint is denoted with a capital M. I usually write out the word midpoint because slope is a lower m, and I don't want you to get the slope and the midpoint mixed up. So your midpoint is x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. So there's going to be 2 separate components. There's going to be an x component, and there's going to be a y component. So let's go ahead now and label our ordered pairs. x1, y1, x2, and y2. So we label our ordered pairs. Then we plug them into our formula. In this case, when we work at the midpoint, we add them together. When we do the slope, we subtract. So we're going to add these together. So we have 1.8 plus 6.7 over 2. And we've got, for the y part, a minus 4.4 plus 3.3 over 2. So that's what we have there. That's what we've got to work with. Now we're going to break it down and then reduce down our decimals. So we'll go ahead and add these together first. So we have a 1.8 plus 6.7, and that's an 8.5 over 2. And then we've got a minus 4.4 and a positive 3.3. The larger one's negative, so that's going to be a minus 1.1 over 2. And then we can reduce those down as a decimal. So 8.5 divided by 2, well, that should then come out to be 4.25. And a minus 1.1 divided by 2, well, that's going to come out to be a minus 0.55. So that's what we've got there. And Madison, isn't it? Yep. Okay. All right. So that's what we've got for our midpoint there. Is everyone all right with how that one works? So that will be your answer on that one. Just make sure you break those decimals all the way down. Midpoint's pretty easy to do. Question 9. Question 9 is a little bit different. Question 9, we're going to work the opposite way. So in question 9, what you have is one endpoint and the midpoint. And we need to find the other endpoint. So for question 9, we've got the point P, which is 3.6, comma, minus 3.2. And then we've got Q that's unknown. That's what we're going to find. And we're going to call Q X and Y. So that's the unknown. And then we have M, which is our midpoint. Which is 2.55, comma, minus 2.9. And that, remember, is your midpoint. Now, when we work this one out, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get two equations. And we're going to have to find the value for the x that's missing, and we're going to have to find the value for the y that's missing. Then we'll put them back together, and that's going to then be our missing point Q. So Q is the missing component here. So let's go ahead and write up our formula again. And your midpoint is x1 plus x2 over 2, and y1 plus y2 over 2. So this is x1, y1 on your P, and Q is x2, y2. Okay, so the x and the y are going to be the missing components. We'll plug them in, and we're going to have to find them. Now, we get our two equations that are separated by the comma. So the comma is going to separate the x part from the y part. We're going to have to do them individually and clear out these fractions. So let's see what we've got. We've got our midpoint, which is 2.55, and we've got a minus 2.9, and that is then going to equal, when we put everything back together, 3.6 plus x over 2, and a minus 3.2 plus y over 2. So that's what we've got. We plugged in our values, the x1 and the y1. Now, what we do is we separate them out. So the x part's in blue, the y part's in green now. So let's write out our two equations. We'll solve each equation independently of the other. And then get our two answers for the x part and the y part. Okay, so I'll do the x part first. And on the x part, we've got 2.55 because that's in front of the comma. That is going to then equal, on the other side, what's in front of the comma, which is that 3.6 plus x over 2. How do we solve this? Well, there's different ways of doing it. The easiest way is make it over 1. Cross multiply them. So 2.55, we'll multiply that by your 2. And that side is going to come out to then be 5.1. And that equals 3.6 plus x there. Move that 3.6 over. Now we've got our x component, which is then a positive 1.5. Is everyone okay with that? You see what we did? We separated it out. Now we did the x part. We also must then do the y part as well. And for the y part, same procedure. We've got a minus 2.9 equals a minus 3.2 plus y over 2. And so then we'll put this over 1. And we will then cross multiply again. watch your signs. That's going to come out to be a minus 5.8. And that equals a minus 3.2 plus y. We'll add our 3.2 over. And now we've got our y component, which is then a minus 2.6. We need to put our answer back together. So what's our midpoint? Or not our midpoint, our point Q. Because that's what we're trying to find. We're trying to find Q. Q is then 1.5, comma, minus 2.6. So that's going to be your answer as an ordered pair. And I think that was probably one of the more difficult questions. And it's really not difficult. It's just a matter of looking at it, making sure we know where to begin. A lot of times, questions in this section and this chapter are not difficult. It's just a matter of where do I even begin? That's where students struggle with. What do I do? Once you start, it's easy. And that's why I try to have you write up the formulas every time so it reinforces what they are. That way you probably won't have to look them up. You'll have them memorized. You don't have to memorize them, but it will make it easier. Question 11. Now, question 11, we want to graph this line, and we want to graph this line by finding the intercepts. So how do we find the intercepts? Well, we make our table for the intercepts, and we use the 0 and the 0. And we're going to be trying to fill in the missing boxes here. And if we can fill them both in with different numbers, assuming they're not 0, 0, then we're done. We don't have to add more points. If both of these come out to be 0, 0, then we're going to have to come out and add another point. So question number 11 is what we're looking at. So 11/5 x plus 3/5 y equals 6. Okay, so what we can do is we can work with it the way it is. Or we can make our life a little bit easier. And we can clear the fractions. And I think we'll do that just so it's easier to work with. Now I can multiply this entire equation by 5. And that's going to get rid of our fractions. So let's just go ahead and get rid of the fractions at the beginning. You can work with the fractions, or you can just clear them out. I think for most students, since we've got a lot of fractions here, it's going to be easier if we just clear them out. So that's going to then be 11x plus 3y equals, don't forget the 5 times the 6, which is then the 30. So we cleared our fractions. Now we need to fill in the missing pieces here to get our intercepts. So we'll start with x equaling 0. Okay, and if x equals 0, then that's 11 times 0 plus 3y equals 30. 11 times 0 is 0, so that's gone. We can solve easily for the y by just simply dividing now by 3. And that gives you the first one, which is then y equals 10. Yep. I think it's going to be easier if you clear the fractions. You can work with them, but students tend to see fractions, and it just makes it more difficult for you mentally. So we get rid of them. And same thing on the next one. We're going to use y equals 0. Well, if I plug in y equals 0, we get 11x plus 3 times 0 equals 30. So that piece is gone. We divide by our 11. And now we get x is 30 over 11. And that's okay. We can graph a fraction. What we do when we graph that fraction is we just estimate where it's at. So now we've got our ordered pairs. So let's go ahead and write them out from our table. Okay, so we've got from our table. So our intercepts. Let's list them out. We've got 0, 10. And that's going to be your y-intercept, because remember it has a y part, so that's your y-intercept here. And then we've got the other one, which is 30 over 11, 0, and that is your x-intercept. So write them out individually. Do not put them together. So there's your x-intercept and your y-intercept both listed out here. Now when we talk about 30 over 11, what is 30 over 11 as a decimal? Well, 30 over 11 is going to be pretty close to 3. I think it's a little bit under 3. Okay, but 30 over 11 is 2.72, or about 3. So I would estimate that as about 3. Okay, it's in between 2 and 3, a little bit closer to 3. We're going to estimate that at about 3. So when we go to graph it, we've got our 2 points. We plot those 2 points. We connect them together, and that gives us our final graph. So let's go ahead now and try to get these points. And we're going to approximate that 30 over 11 with about 3, because that's about where it's at. They're not going to be exactly accurate every time, because it's hard to graph these fractions. But just estimate where they belong. If we wanted a precise graph, we would use a computer. When we're trying to graph these, we're just basically sketching what it should look like. So 0, 10 is up 10 units. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 0, 10 is right here. And that's going to be your y-intercept, because that's where it touches the y-axis. The x-intercept is about 3, 0. So it's about 3. We'll go a little bit under 3, because 30 over 11 is a little bit less than 3. But we'll put it real close to 3, about 3. Now what do? Take our ruler or straight edge. We connect them together, and we are done. So we'll just take our straight edge here, and we'll connect these together. And there is your graph. And it told us to find the intercepts, so that's what we did. And we then used our intercepts to graph that line. Is everyone okay with that? That was a little bit tricky because at 30 over 11, we had to approximate it as a decimal. And I think, again, the easiest way to handle this one with the fractions, and you can always do this. If you have an equal sign, you can always clear the fractions at the beginning. So if you don't want to work with the fractions at the very beginning, clear them out. That way they're gone. It's easier to work with. And that can always be done as long as you have an equal sign. And this one has an equal sign, so we cleared them out at the very beginning. If there's not very many, you can work with them, but I chose just to get rid of them here. And unless anyone has any questions out of 2-2, then we'll move on to 2-3. Did anybody have any questions to look at out of 2-2? Did you find any? I think 2-2 was an easier section. 2-2 was about the slope. So anything out of 2-2 before we move on? Okay, well, then we'll move on and we'll look at now 2.3. And we've got quite a few questions out of 2.3. And 2.3 is a more difficult section. I think it's the most difficult section in this chapter. And we're going to begin with question number 4. And I believe this one is the one that I picked because it has a slope of 0. And question 4 gives you this. They give you the point minus 10, comma 8, and a slope of 0. And so this is what we're going to work with here. Now, we want to find the equation in standard form. Let's review a little bit about our slopes. So this is going to be a quick review. If your slope is positive, your line looks like that. And it has both x and y. If your slope is negative, it's another diagonal line, and you have x and y. If your slope is 0, remember, if your slope is 0, that is going to be a horizontal line, right? Undefined is vertical. 0 is a horizontal line. And it's a horizontal line, and it only has a y. If your slope is undefined, then it is a vertical line, and it has only the x values. So it only has an x in the answer. I'm going to show you 2 ways of looking at this question. Let's go ahead and do it with our formula. Okay, now it should come out to look like this. It should be just have a y. Okay, I can look at it and tell you that it should be y equals 8, just because my slope is 0. But let's verify that. Let's use our point slope formula. If I use my point slope formula, it's y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And this up here, of course, is your x1 and your y1. Plug your values in. So that's y minus 8 equals 0 times x minus a minus 10. Now, I already know that it should be a y line. Why? Because your slope is 0, right? Now, look at what's going to happen with our equation here. Just to verify that if you use that point slope formula, you're going to get the same result. What's going to happen to everything on the right-hand side? Everything on the right-hand side is going to cancel out. Why? Because 0 times anything is still what? 0 times any number or any variable is what? 0. So see, the right-hand side comes out to be 0. And now we can finish it, because when we add that 8 over, what do we get? We get now y equals 8. We could have done this without even using that formula. We could have looked at this and said, my slope is 0. All right? Now, if something has a 0 slope, it's only going to have a y component. And what's the y component of my ordered pair? 8. If you didn't see it and you worked it through and you put the 0 in, you'll get the same result, right? You'll get y equals 8 because the right-hand side is going to make it what? 0. If it was undefined, if this would have been undefined, what would my answer be? Well, if my slope was undefined, it would be an x line, and it would be x equals a negative 10. Okay, so 0 slope means it has a y component only. Undefined slope means that it has an x component only. I wanted to pick this one just to kind of review vertical and horizontal lines again. Nobody asked about it, but I thought that one was a good one for us to look at. We did ask about question 7. And question 7 is m equals minus 4 thirds. And then we have a y-intercept of 0, 26 over 3. And we want this one in slope-intercept form. So that's what we want. Now, that y-intercept is a point. And we could go through all the work of using the point-slope formula. But we would have to work with all these fractions. We'd have to clear them out. We can jump directly to our answer. Why? Well, what does the slope-intercept form look like? Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. M is going to match up with what we already have. And what about the b? The b comes from the y-intercept. And the y-intercept is 0, b. So that means this piece right here, that 26 over 3, that is like your b. So we don't have to use the point-slope formula because we have that y-intercept. If it was a different point, if there would have been a 3 here in front of that 26 over 3, we would have to use point-slope. But because of the fact that they gave you the y-intercept, that's our b component, and we can jump directly to our answer, which is going to be y equals minus 4 thirds x plus 26 over 3. Okay, that's all we have to do because they gave you the y-intercept, and that is the b component when written in slope-intercept form. So you don't have to go through all the algebra. You can realize that's a y-intercept and jump to the answer. (13) goes back to what we just talked about with question 4. So let's now look at question 13. And in question 13, they give you the point 1/5, comma, 2/5, and they want it to be a vertical line. We can't use the point-slope formula on this one because this question's a vertical line. So let's think about a vertical line. And let's think about which axis it crosses and what the slope would be. If I have a vertical line looks like that, right? Okay, vertical line. And we talked about this a moment ago. Vertical line has an undefined slope. And on a vertical line, what does it cross? It crosses the x-axis. So what are you going to have? Only an x part. Because it's a vertical line, it only crosses the x-axis. Now, what is the x component of my ordered pair? Well, the x component of my ordered pair is going to be that 1/5. So what would my answer be? My answer would simply be x equals 1/5. That's it. Because it's a vertical line. Now, if I would have reversed that, and if I would have said, give me a horizontal line. Well, a horizontal line would have a slope of what? 0. And it would look like this. And it would cross the y-axis. And what would the y component of this one be? 2/5. So if I said horizontal line, what would your answer be? Y equals 2/5, right? Okay. Draw a picture. I think pictures really help. You can even plot the point if you need to. But when it's a vertical line, it's undefined slope, and you only have an x part. If your slope is 0, it's a horizontal line, you only have the y part. And if it's any other number, it's a diagonal line, and you have both the x and the y components. Question 14. So for question 14, we want this in standard form. And we've got the point 0, 5. Now that is a y-intercept. And we could jump to our answer in slope-intercept form. But let's just go ahead and use our point-slope formula. And we want this one in standard form. Because we've got to get it in standard form anyways. So let's just use our point-slope formula. Even though this is a y-intercept, we could jump to the slope-intercept form, then rewrite it in standard. But let's just work it out with the point-slope formula. So our point-slope formula is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And we label our ordered pair x1 and y1. I'm going to work through this one a little bit slower because we have to know how to use the point-slope formula to complete this section. So that's the most important part of this section, is how to use the point-slope formula. We've got everything labeled out. Okay, now plug the numbers in. If they have a subscript, they're replaced with a number. If they don't, if they're just a variable, you leave them as they are. So let's go ahead and plug them in. Y stays as y. Y1 is right here. Bring down your negative, and that's going to be a minus 5. Make sure you know how to plug the values into the point-slope formula. On the right-hand side, then we have a minus 2/5, and then we've got x, and x1 is 0. Now, we need to go ahead and clear out our parentheses and then see what we're dealing with. Let's distribute through. And we've got y minus 5 equals a minus 2/5 x. Now, when we write our answer, we either want it in slope-intercept form or in standard form. Now, in standard form, just so we can review what standard form is, what does it look like? Standard form is ax plus by equals c. And these are capitals because these are integers. So no fractions or decimals. And a must be positive. Okay, so a's got to be positive here. So no fractions or decimals. Now, if we have fractions, we need to get rid of them, which we do in this case. Right? We have a fraction. So let's go ahead and get rid of that fraction by multiplying everything by a 5. That's going to clear them all out. So that's our first step. No fractions or decimals. So that's 5y minus 25 equals a minus 2x. Needs to look like this. So the x and the y need to be on the same side. No decimals. And when we're done, the x value must be positive. So let's move things around. I'm going to add the 2x over. And I'm also going to add the 25 to move it to the right. So let's see what we're left with now. When we rewrite it, it should be in standard form, which is 2x plus 5y equals now 25. And that's going to be your final answer in standard form. Okay, very, very important that we know how to use that point-slope formula, and we understand the difference between standard form and slope-intercept. We're going to go over it again today when we look at how to build some more line equations. Question 16 is the last one that we need to look at. And question 16, I picked this one just because in the past, students are confused about what I really want. So let's read the directions. We want to find the slope, so that means we're going to find our m. And we're also going to find that y-intercept, which is that b component. I'm doing 16. It's the same as what you would do for 15. So 16. So I'll do 16. You can try 15. They're basically the same. 16 is 6x minus 9y equals a negative 9. And we want the slope and y-intercept. And how do we do that? Okay, well, we need a slope and we need the y-intercept, right? So what would happen if we use the slope-intercept form? Okay, it's got what we need in it. We want the slope, we want the y-intercept. We have a formula that has that name in it. The slope, the slope-intercept form, right? So that's what we want. We want to get it in slope-intercept form. So we're going to have to now solve it for y. That's going to get it in slope-intercept form. So 6x minus 9y equals negative 9. We're going to go ahead and move that 6x over. We're going to solve it for y. Okay, and now we have a minus 9y equals a minus 6x minus 9. And we want this in slope-intercept form, which means we solve it for y. So divide everything by a 9, and we've got to reduce. Make sure you reduce. And when you reduce, you get y equals now. Negative and negative makes it a positive, and 6 over 9 reduces down to be a positive 2/3 x. Negative over negative again makes it positive. 9 over 9 is a 1. Now, what's my slope? Okay, 2/3. That's what we wanted. What about the y-intercept? Well, write it as an ordered pair. You were correct. We need always write these as an ordered pair. You're correct. It's going to be 0, 1. So there's your slope, which is that 2/3. And there is your y-intercept. And make sure that you write that y-intercept as an ordered pair. And it is 0, 1. Is everyone all right with that so far? Do you see what to do there? Let's go ahead now and take a short break. And then we're going to come back and we're going to finish up 2.3. 2.3, again, is the hardest section in this chapter. So let's meet back here in about 10 minutes. So let's meet back here at 9:30. So let's meet back here at 9:30, and then we will